welcome to the Environmental Science and Studies introduction. I'm Dr. Robin Van Meter. I'm an associate professor.
I'm Dr. Rebecca Fox. I'm also an associate professor.
So in Environmental Science and Studies, we're really excited because we can get you out into the field with hands-on experiences almost every time we go out into the field. So you can get both a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Arts.
All of your classes are environmental science or studies focused classes, and so that means they don't just focus on the environment, but focus on the interactions of humans and the environment. And so today we're in the perfect place to really have a look at some of those influences.
So right now we're standing in a hardwood wetland, which is during part of the year you would just think we were standing in the woods because there would be absolutely no water whatsoever. These are really unique wetlands here on Maryland's eastern shore. They're Delmarva Bays, but you can see right now we're standing in a lot of water. So these are really important critical wetland habitats because they support really unique species, particularly amphibians and a lot of aquatic invertebrates, but they also are exposed to a lot of human impact. So for instance, while we're standing in the wooded portion of this wetland right now, off to our right we can see that there is a huge power line, then there are a series of roadways, and we even have an agricultural field across the street.
So although you might think this is just looking like a natural wetland, it is influenced by human impacts. So my research actually tends to focus on agriculture and nutrient inputs from agricultural systems. And Delmarva Bays like this can be a location where we can have a lot of nutrient transfer and loss. If you've ever driven by a farm field locally and you see a giant wet spot, circular wet spot in the middle of the field, it's typically a former Delmarva Bay. And so you see them in agricultural lands. All around us is actually wetlands that were converted and drained for agriculture. And so this is a great place to look for nutrient transformations, to look for greenhouse gases, and to look for different processes that we can study.
So my research really focuses on human impact on amphibians and amphibian-based food webs. So in a Delmarva Bay like this, we've talked about human impact from roadways and agriculture and from the power line. So really my research focuses on the toxins that come from human impact and how that impacts amphibians. So I often bring students out into wetlands like this, Delmarva Bays, and we sample for different types of frogs and salamanders, both in the egg and larval stages, but we'll also come out into the fall and look for adults. So one of the projects I'm working on right now is with marbled salamanders, and we come out in the fall when these Delmarva Bays are dry, before they have filled with water, and we look for adults and we swab the skin of the adults because we're trying to find out how human impact is adversely affecting the biology of the organisms through a non-lethal method. And so it's fun to come out and look for the adult salamanders because then the rain comes, the wetlands fill up, and that's when the salamanders breed, and we can come back out in the winter and look for some salamander larvae, which hopefully we're going to find a few today.
So now we're going to show you some different field techniques and field skills that we use with our classes that we would like to show you so that you can come to Washington College and do these with us in the future. And so as we look at nutrients and we look at amphibians, we're going to show you some of those different things.
I've just found a tadpole. We're going to go ahead and take a look at this tadpole. I'm going to get him out of the net so we can identify it, and then we will put the tadpole quickly back in. It's pretty chilly out, so the tadpole's not moving quickly, which makes it a little bit easier for me. But if we take a look at this tadpole, there is a species of tadpole that breeds both in the spring and it can breed again in the fall. And I can tell that's a leopard frog. And this is a southern leopard frog. I can see that it's a southern leopard frog because it has a white milk mustache. So it has little white lines coming off other side of its mouth. And so this species, as I mentioned, it'll breed in the spring. And then this year I noticed they bred this fall, I think because it was such a particularly warm fall and very rainy. But they're really important in these wetland habitats. They are both predators and they are both prey. So they play a really significant role in these wetland food webs. I also have several amphipods in here, and these are really interesting because they are wetland indicators. So when you find animals like this and they are obligate wetland indicators, it's really important. And that's one of the ways that scientists can distinguish a critical wetland habitat from other wetland habitats that might be classified as being non-critical. But you see he's rolling up into a ball. That's naturally what they do there. So I'll go ahead and put him back in the water and we'll keep searching. I found this dragonfly larvae, and these also play a critically important role in these wetlands because these animals are predators. So they could also be preyed upon by larger animals. But if I flip this animal over here, you can see that it actually has a very large mandible, a very large jaw. And the reason why that makes these such important predators in these wetland habitats is because they can expand that jaw and they can eat animals that are actually much larger than you would think. So these are important predators of tadpoles. So I'm out here studying amphibians, and these individuals will actually eat the amphibians I study. So they're quite fascinating and also quite important. So in the spring, these dragonfly larvae will metamorphose and they will turn into aerial flying adults.
So one of the things that wetlands are really good for, or known for, is methane production. Wetlands are one of the largest sources of natural methane for the atmosphere, and you can actually see methane bubbles trapped under the ice, which is really cool. So if you took a sample of this would have a really high methane concentration. And so away from being influenced by humans, wetlands actually contribute a lot of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, which contributes to our greenhouse gases. So one of the ways that Dr. Van Meter and my research ties together is that I look at the nutrients, I look at dissolved gases that are really influential for things like amphibians. So things like amphibians and other organisms require certain conditions to survive, like certain oxygen ranges, certain pH ranges, certain conductivity ranges. And so this is YSI, and we actually use them in a lot of our labs. It will become very familiar to you. And it basically is a multi-probe instrument. And so you can see 3 separate probes that measure oxygen, pH, and conductivity. And so all you have to do is screw it back on, and this is just to protect it. Put it in the water and let it equilibrate. And so ideally you don't want it to sit on the bottom in a system like this unless you want to know what's going on the bottom. But if you look around us, you see lots of leaves. Wetlands are one of those locations that are actually carbon sinks. You can see the leaves fall, but because oxygen isn't always high year-round, a lot of these leaves can actually escape decomposition. And so if you measure oxygen on the bottom, it's often really low because there's a lot of microbial respiration going on there. And so this really gives us a nice indication of the baseline conditions that are appropriate for amphibians, but it can also just give us an overall idea of how healthy the system is. Some of the measurements that I just measured on the YSI, Dr. Van Meter, is it's 4.8 degrees Celsius, so it makes sense that our answers are
very cold. Very cold. The nice thing about that, though, is that even when it's really cold out, these animals are able to survive. So some of the animals, like I said, if they're specifically fall breeding amphibians, then they're specifically adapted for these really harsh cold conditions. So they're not minding it at all.
DO is dissolved oxygen, so that's the amount of oxygen that's actually dissolved in the water that things like amphibians and fish need to breathe. And so our DO is at 10.55 or 82.5%.
So the dissolved oxygen reading Dr. Fox just mentioned of about 10 to 11 is pretty typical for these wetland systems. And you can see that this wetland has a lot of plant growth in it, a lot of sphagnum moss that's low-lying, and a lot of these taller grasses. And so these plants are all photosynthesizing and putting off oxygen into the water column, which is really important for the amphibians and macroinvertebrates that live here. So most amphibians can survive in a dissolved oxygen range of maybe down to 7 or 8 or 9, and they can survive in dissolved oxygen levels going all the way up to maybe 12 or higher.
So the pH of the system is 3.63, which is actually quite a low pH range. So pH is probably something you're familiar with, right? You've probably measured it in classes already. And so pH, you can think of it very basically as either being acidic or basic, right? But it's actually a measure of how many hydrogen ions are in solution. And so it does give us a good indication of what kind of species might survive depending on the pH.
About 3.6 is really low, but again, that's not unusual for these wetlands, these Delmarva bays. They classically are quite low pH systems. So they typically range anywhere from about 4 to 5, which again, if neutral is a pH of 7, you can see that these systems are on the acidic end of things. But again, the amphibians and the macroinvertebrates that are adapted to living here can thrive quite easily in that pH.
One of the measurements we often make in a number of our classes are nutrient measurements. Nutrients are really critical to plant growth. Plants need nitrogen and phosphorus to grow. And we also are in a landscape that is full of agriculture. So the eastern shore of Maryland, the dominant land use is actually agriculture. And to agriculture, we have lots of nitrogen and phosphorus applied. And that is actually applied so that the crops can grow and we can get enough food to feed everyone. But one of the impacts of that is that we sometimes lose that nitrogen and phosphorus from the farm fields, and it can end up in places like this Delmarva Bay. And so what I'm going to do is fill up this bottle. And so basically to take nutrient samples, you just fill, you have to rinse your bottle 3 times just to make sure that there's nothing in the bottle from previously. I'm just going to do it twice so that it's not so boring for you. And then we fill it all the way up. Cap it. We would ideally put it in a cooler or something like that and bring it back to the lab for us to do data analysis on it. And so we do lots and lots of hands-on field experiences, but we also pair that with different lab analyses that we do back in the multiple labs we have on campus for us to do this. And so if we were in lab now, we would take this back and we would analyze it and figure out how many nutrients were in it.
So right now we're in a hardwood wetland at RAFC, which stands for River and Field Campus. And so we're really excited because we have a several thousand-acre field campus that's associated with the college. And so for a lot of our lab experiences, we're bringing students out here to RAFC to visit a variety of different habitats like wetlands, agricultural areas, forested areas, and students really get to do a lot of hands-on laboratory and research work with animals and with soils and with plants and measuring greenhouse gases and doing water quality analyses.
So today we've been looking at some of the human influences that occur to these wetlands, right, and that occur to amphibians. And through the techniques and the different experiences we give you through the Department of Environmental Science and Studies at Washington College, you'll be set up to go into a variety of careers after you graduate. And not only do we as a department provide you with lots of different hands-on skills, there's lots of wonderful departments at Washington College that really give you that liberal arts perspective so that you can look at these environmental problems we have from lots of different angles and investigate them through lots of different lenses.
If you were in class with us, you would absolutely be able to wear, I'm wearing chest waders, Dr. Fox was wearing hip waders, you would absolutely have your own pair of waders on. There would be at most 16 students in class with you. We have enough supplies for everybody. So students are literally getting out into the field, really engaging in these hands-on experiences. You would be dip netting, you would be using the YSI, you would be using all of the instrumentation yourself, not just watching us do these really fun activities. So we want to also mention that while Dr. Fox and I have research interests that tie together with respect to chemicals and nutrients and amphibians and wetland habitats, there are also a lot of other faculty in the Department of Environmental Science and Studies. So you would have the opportunity to work with faculty members that study soil chemistry and estuarine and marine invertebrates and mussels and oysters. We have an environmental economist, and we also have a faculty member who studies metals and plastics in the local river system. So lots of opportunities for you to get out and get engaged in the environment through a variety of different lenses.
So the experience we've shown you today is an example of something we would do in a science-based lab, but you can also get a degree in environmental studies. And so although we do teach science classes, Dr. Van Meter and I, there are lots of other classes you can take in other departments that also count towards your environmental studies degree. You can take classes in sociology, in anthropology, economics. You can take classes in political science, in Chesapeake Regional Studies, and English. And so we have all of these different opportunities for you to really delve deep into the study of the environment through lots of different angles.
So it's been so much fun to be out here with you today, and we really hope you got a taste for what it's like to be an environmental science and studies major, and we really hope to see you in the future.
If you have any questions for us individually, you can reach out to us. You'll see our emails on the screens. You can find us on the college's Environmental Science and Studies website, or you can reach out to admissions and they can put you in contact with us. We'd definitely love to have a conversation about how you can fit in and become part of our department at Washington College.